All right. While the last people are still dropping in with some heavy rain haunting the evening, nonetheless, great to see all of you here. I will start with what for me is going to prove the most difficult. Here we go. Ewarbash hevalen heja hun beger haten. Welcome all to the event Stateless Democracy, the Revolution in Rojava, Kurdistan. My name is... thank you. Much appreciated. There will be a second experiment later on the text. Welcome all to the event Stateless Democracy. My name is Jonas Staal. I'm an artist, and together with BAK, Basis voor Actuele Kunst in Utrecht, I'm the founder of the New World Academy, which organized this evening. And I welcome you here also on behalf of BAK's director, Maria Lavajova, sitting right in front of me here. Our New World Academy is a school that works on the verge of art and politics and that invites stateless political groups to work with artists and students. And together they explore the role of art at the heart of political struggle. And participants to our academy have developed projects with, amongst others, the National Democratic Movement of the Philippines. You see a session here now hosted by Professor José María Sison. We developed a project with Refugee Collective We Are Here, a group of refugees that organized themselves as a political group here in Amsterdam only 2 years ago. The International Pirate Parties, the National Liberation Movement of Azawad. Here are some quick impressions, and I'm very happy to see that many of our former teachers of the different stateless groups that we've worked with are present with us tonight as well. And tonight we have arrived at the 5th session in collaboration with representatives of the Kurdish women movement. Our first contact was 2 years ago during a conference that the New World Project organized in Berlin, where we met Fadil Yildirim, that you see present here, a prominent and brilliant Kurdish activist that inspired our organization and the reason to continue to exchange with them in the past 2 years. Now, in our current time, the political role of art all too often seems limited to making capitalism more beautiful, as artist Hito Sterl so accurately wrote. This is why we as the New World Academy look for new alliances between art and progressive stateless political groups to explore a different political paradigm from which we can also learn a different practice of art. Not in order to make art in the world that we are already living in, but to make a world, a new world. And tonight we start the first of a series of conferences in the framework of the New World Academy in collaboration with representatives of the Kurdish women movement, entitled Stateless Democracy, in order to understand how that new world is being built as we speak. We planned this collaboration that is going to take pretty much a year, a long time ago, and it was also planned to take place later. But the urgent situation in Rojava and Syrian Kurdistan has brought us to organize this conference right away tonight. Now, the urgencies that are going to drive much of the speeches and much of the debates tonight, these might sometimes have little to do with art, and the word art might not be heard after this introductory speech by me. But I think it's important to remember that revolutions are not only military conflicts with great losses and grievances. They are also moments of great resilience and profound creativity. And artists can learn from such urgencies. A very direct expression is this poster that you see behind me here, drawn by my friend and colleague, artist Golrokh Nafisi, who is here with us tonight, in solidarity with the resistance in Rojava. I'm glad to keep up this presentation, this image, on screen during this introduction to remind you that art can shape and also be shaped by that revolutionary urgency. As many of you here present probably know, Rojava Kurdistan has become an autonomous political entity in the period of the Syrian War that started in 2011, the Rojava Revolution manifesting in 2012, and the declaration of its autonomy in 2013, something that will be elaborated by the speakers here tonight. Rojava is not an independent state and does not strive to be one, but should rather be understood as interlinked councils and cantons. The Rojava Revolution is modeled after Democratic Confederalism, a concept developed as a model of political practice by Abdullah Öcalan, the founder of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, inspired by the writings of the American anarchist and ecologist Murray Bookchin. And Rojava forms a unique, multi-ethnic and multi-religious political experiment in which gender equality, ecology and grassroots democracy through popular assembly form the key foundations. And as such, Rojava represents the promise of what we have started to refer to as a stateless democracy that wishes to overcome in day-to-day communal or communalist political practice the oppressive and patriarchal dimensions of the state. As the American anthropologist David Graeber wrote only a week ago, I think, in The Guardian, Rojava brings to mind the 1936 Spanish Revolution, where an anarchist, libertarian, socialist experiment in Catalonia was conducted for 2 years in the form of workers' collectives and popular assemblies. And that happened in the middle of a war in which these communes had to wage armed struggle against Franco's fascist forces on one hand and the Soviet army on the other. According to Graeber, what Catalonia was then, Rojava is today, where Rojava's People's Protection Unit, the YPG, and its women movement, the Women's Protection Unit, the YPJ, struggle against the regime on Assad on one hand and against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, on the other. At the same time, the resistance in Rojava is also a fierce critic of the so-called war on terror that the US wages in the region and in which the Dutch state has become implicated as well. As a stateless democratic force, they demand to be recognized as the only real boots on the ground, to use a term that has been circulating the news lately a lot. The only boots on the ground that can secure and build a community in which different ethnicities, religious and political communities can coexist in a durable future. And today, Rojava is under severe threat. You have followed the news on how Kobane, one of its key cities, has been attacked by ISIS, how hundreds of thousands had to flee, and what terrible and violent fate awaited those who have been captured by aggressors. Women and men in Rojava, young and old, have resisted courageously, while the Turkish government blocked support in arms, keeps resistant forces that wish to provide assistance to Rojava within its borders, and refuses to let many suffering refugees into their country. And in the meantime, the new coalition of the willing, including the Netherlands, bombs ISIS within its own state-built project in Iraq, but has been extremely hesitant to recognize the Rojava resistance as those who could actually lead the region into a different future. And if we summarize, from the British mandate over Iraq, its instrumentalization in the Iran-Iraq war, the 2003 war in Iraq, the dismantling of Hussein's Sunni government, the creation of US extra-legal black sites where the CIA tortured Iraqi citizens. This history of colonialism, military intervention, occupation, all of these contributed substantially to the possibility for ISIS to come into being in the first place. And now, that very same coalition of the willing says that it can fight it as well. And it is a sad thing to realize that ultranationalist and racist rhetoric here in Europe has contributed to the internal support of ISIS as well. The marginalization and the criminalization of many different Muslim communities in Europe added to the choice of young people from all over the continent, including the Netherlands, to join ISIS. And that means that the bombs that this Dutch government is dropping with F-16s in Iraq as we speak kills our own Dutch citizens after they're stripped from their passport thanks to the US Security Council, who now allows people to become stateless when they're considered or a potential terrorist threat. I do not say this to legitimate ISIS in any way, not in any way. But the dark flag that is depicted in Golrokh Nafisi's poster behind me, for me, does not stand for ISIS alone, but also for the reckless and the illegal Western wars and the ultranationalist discourse that has contributed to the hell that has now hit Rojava. But there is a way out, and the Rojava resistance gives also proof of this. Not only does it need our support, now that it's threatened by brutal force, but we also need to learn from its political and cultural practices. On behalf of the New World Academy, Maria Lavajova and I want to thank the Balie for opening their doors to us at this critical time, its director, Yuri Albrechts in particular, as well as our team from the New World Academy, Yunus, René and Imara, and that of Bak, Arjen and Nick, who have worked long and hard to make this urgent conference come into being. And we thank our organizing partner, the Center for Conflict Studies of the University of Utrecht. I also thank our different speakers and debaters of tonight, Joost Jongerden from the Wageningen University and Jasper Blom, the director of the Scientific Bureau of GroenLinks, the Green Left Party. And in a moment, I will hand over the floor to our chair, Jolle Demmers, associate professor and co-founder of the Center for Conflict Studies at Utrecht University, who, as our chair, will guide us through this evening. But before I do that, our gratitude, first of all, goes out to the main speakers of tonight. Dilsha Osman, co-president of the Kurdish Democratic Society Congress in Europe, the KCDE, and Dilar Dirik, PhD researcher and activist of the Kurdish women movement. Dilsha and Dilar, the fact that you are willing to speak here while your communities are in such great crisis obliges us to make this evening more than simply about awareness and understanding, but it obliges us to make the step forward towards the question of political and cultural practice. How can our civil society learn from and contribute to the Rojava resistance? You are building a new world, and you are fighting for it at the same time, and your courage and determination is exemplary. And I speak also on behalf of Maria Lavajova when I say that it is a privilege to have the chance to have worked with you and organized this evening. So thank you for being a horizon to us all. Gelek spas, je bou hevien, voix jemara.
I'm not going to be able to repeat that, I'm afraid. Good evening, my name is Jolle Demmers. I'll be your chair for tonight. And I'm going to just make a very short remark before we open the floor to our esteemed speakers. I think this evening has two aims and it has two parts. The first aim is to listen and learn. And for that, before the break, we have three speakers who each will give their analysis of the Rojava case in about 20 minutes each. Then we have a break, and after the break, we open the floor for discussants. We have two discussants who each give their view on the case, and then we open the floor for questions and debate. So the first part before the break is really the part to listen and learn. And I think as consumer citizens in an increasingly mediatized world, a world that is told to us through our screens, it seems very hard to make sense of, let alone respond to the suffering of others and the struggles of others. Our capacity to analyze and our capacity to judge is troubled with questions of complexity and authenticity and inauthenticity. Tonight we have no screens. This is, I think, an excellent opportunity to directly learn from those engaged in the Rojava revolution. The second part and the second aim is about the question, and I think Jonas referred to that explicitly, the question about where we stand as a public, and to think aloud where we stand as a public, where we stand as citizens and subjects of a state that now is officially stakeholder in this war, and based on this, perhaps try and propose forms of transnational engagement, forms of activism that fit the stateless revolution in Rojava. And to do this, we too have to think outside the state as our representative and go beyond the obvious scripts, such as lobbying the government or sending in a petition to your favorite political party, to think about meaningful forms of post-state activism and engagement. And an example for that, for instance, could be the use of tactical media in this. We're going to talk about that. I'm kindly requesting my three speakers to please stick to the very brief 20 minutes that you have, I realize this is a very urgent matter and this is a very emotional matter. So I have this harsh task of cutting you short after 20 minutes. I'm a terrible, harsh chair, so I will cut you short. So as soon as I will stand up with my microphone, that will mean that I'm really expecting you to wrap up your talk. There's plenty of time after the break to answer questions and to elaborate on certain issues. So with that on the agenda and this very dramatic background, thunder, to sort of support the urgency as in a bad Hollywood movie, I'm very proud to open the floor and to give the floor to Dilar Dirik. She's an activist of the Kurdish women movement and a PhD candidate at the sociology department at Cambridge University. Her work examines the role of women in the Kurdish liberation movement by comparing the ways in which the commitment to gender equality by different Kurdish parties is related to their stance on institutions of power. Dilar, the floor is yours.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing such an event in such a very quick time. Thank you very much. And I would like to begin introducing the Rojava revolution to you by first of all saluting the brave resistance, the courageous people in Kobane who have been showing us hope in these very dark times, under the siege of the so-called Islamic State with all its darkness. I would like to dedicate my talk anyways, or perhaps this whole panel, if you agree, to the brave resistance of the people in Kobane and to the Rojava revolution. I will not focus too much on the current issues because Dilshah will do that afterwards. I want to introduce the system of Rojava to you, the revolution. Why is this a revolution? Because we have been hearing the word revolution so many times in the recent years, and many times we saw that these are not actually revolutions because they were either co-opted by different powers or they failed at some point for very different reasons. But I argue that what is happening in Rojava, in spite of all the marginalization that it experienced from across the international political spectrum, it has given us a source of hope, and that is why it is definitely worth being called a revolution. And in order for this revolution to succeed, it is also our duty as the people here in Europe to contribute to that, because the Battle of Kobane has shown us that this was a very, very historic moment. And I believe that in order to be on the right side of history, the people in Rojava need our support. So first of all, I apologize if many of the things that I will say in this talk are repetitive to some of you, because some of you might actually be quite familiar with Rojava, where it is, what is happening there. But I want to give you a general overview of the situation there. So you can see this is the Syrian-Turkish border. These yellow areas are basically Rojava. So Rojava, this is actually an old map, but it's very difficult to have an updated map because the situation changes all the time. So this black area is the Islamic State, the green areas are under rebel control, under the general FSA, and the red areas are the regime, this Assad regime. So the Kurdish people live across 4 different nations. I'm sure many of you know that, across Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And Rojava is the Syrian part of Kurdistan. And due to the arbitrariness of these borders, Rojava is actually, at the moment, not connected due to the siege of different forces as well. So Rojava now consists of 3 autonomous cantons. I will explain that in a little bit, but as long as we have the map here. This is the Afrin canton. This is Kobane, which has been the focus of international attention recently. And this is the Cizre canton. So just to give you a very rough chronology of the movement, can I actually take this out? Yeah. Because I think this is more comfortable.
This one has no.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So, as you know, the Syrian Civil War, what was often referred to as the so-called Arab Spring, has started around the time of 2011. And in 2012, the regime forces of Bashar al-Assad actually withdrew from the north of Syria, from Rojava, because it needed its troops elsewhere. So what then happened is that the Kurdish people in the region, in Rojava, seized control over the area and declared the so-called Rojava Revolution on the 19th of July 2012. So we can say that this was the beginning of the Rojava Revolution, the beginning of the self-determination of the people in the region. And ever since, the Rojava region has been under attack by both the regime forces as well as different jihadist groups. First, more by the so-called al-Nusra Front, and now, as you all know, the so-called Islamic State or Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. In 2013, in spite of the political and economic marginalization that the Kurds in Rojava experienced, especially because Kurdish autonomy in the north of Syria was seen as a threat for the entire region, for the regime, for the rebels, and also for the NATO member Turkey. So in spite of that, towards the end of 2013, the administration there declared autonomy, and just a few months after that, in spite of their exclusion from the Geneva II peace conference, which was supposed to bring together different parties of the Syrian conflict to find a solution, which is very questionable because 10% of the population, the Kurds, were not invited to that. So in spite of this marginalization, the Kurds declared, on the same day actually as the Geneva II conference, from which they were excluded, the Kurds declared 3 autonomous cantons, Cizre, Afrin, and Kobane, just once again here. So, I want to focus on the revolutionary aspects of Rojava because, as I've said, it is very easy to talk about revolution these days if it is not a genuine one. First of all, it is important to mention the socioeconomic and political, cultural makeup of Rojava. Not only Kurdish people live in Rojava, there are many Arabs, Assyrians, Armenians, and other different ethnic and religious groups living in the area. So, the autonomous ambitions of the Kurds in Rojava were often called as nationalism, or they are secessionists, and often even called terrorists, especially by the Turkish state. When Turkey a few years ago talked about not tolerating a terrorist entity by their border, they were not talking about the Islamic State or al-Nusra or any other jihadist group. They were talking about the Kurds in Rojava. Because for Turkey, it was a terrorist threat that the people there would seek a self-determined life. And this is because of the ideological and also political links between the dominant party there, the PYD, the Democratic Union Party, with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. As you can see, these last 2 years, I think for everyone who has been following this conflict have been extremely intense. People are extremely mobilized, extremely politicized, and as I speak, I want to show you pictures of this revolution as well, because I think it is important for you to realize what is going on there in a visual way, because otherwise we speak and we have no clue what is going on there. But I want you to see how what this war, what this mobilization has done with the social makeup of the people there. So the system in Rojava seeks to be somehow an alternative to the dominant order, to the nation-state-oriented, statehood-oriented, capitalist, patriarchal system. Because even though this is if you could argue, a national liberationist movement, it does not seek to, first of all, only get freedom or liberation or justice for Kurdish people, but for all of the peoples in the region. With its own self-determination, it also seeks to liberate the whole of Syria, to democratize the region, and that is why we cannot think of Rojava in these very primitive nationalist terms, because, as I will elaborate, the system that is trying to be built there is an alternative to the global dominant order, which has created all these problems to begin with. So, as Jonas has already said, the ground of this has often been referred to as democratic confederalism or democratic autonomy, most prominently based on the ideas of Abdullah Öcalan, the imprisoned ideological representative of the Kurdistan Workers' Party. So the basic claim is that the nation-state system has failed. It has caused so many problems, so much oppression, so our new understanding of freedom, of liberation cannot take place within the same parameters if it has caused all these problems. So we shouldn't seek another nation-state with the same parameters, but instead try to establish an alternative to it, and also work in spite of the dominant oppressive structures that exist around us. So the aim is not to wait for freedom that may never come, but to create your freedom here and now, even if, no matter what happens around you. So, and this system is put into practice through a grassroots movement that consists of councils, of communes, of cooperatives, and in which the women's movement specifically is autonomously organized. So the system in Rojava at the moment, as I've said, there are 3 different cantons. Each canton has 22 ministries, and each ministry has 1 minister and 2 deputies. In order to have a different kind of system, for each minister, if the minister, he or she is a Kurd, then 2 deputies have to be 1 Arab and 1 Assyrian. If the minister is Arab, then the deputies have to be 1 Kurd, 1 Assyrian. And at least one of these people have to be a woman. At the same time, the principle of co-presidency is enforced by the PYD, which means that 1 woman and 1 man share the chair on all administrative levels, from the high-level party presidencies down to local neighborhood councils. So the co-presidents of the PYD, for example, they are Salih Muslim and Asya Abdullah. So at the same time, this is, as I've said, an alternative to bring together the different ethnic and religious groups living in the region, to not be a domination by Kurds, but to integrate all of the peoples and different religious groups into the system. That is why, for example, for each minister, there have to be 2 deputies. In the Cizre canton, which is the most multi-ethnic, multicultural of the 3 cantons, where it is more diverse, 3 official languages have been announced, and a first university has been created there that also seeks to have an alternative educational system, and so on and so forth. And I will elaborate on this later on, another very core principle, and that is also what you have probably seen in the media, is the focus on gender equality, even though now the media very problematically puts Kurdish women fighters as these symbols, as these great fighters against ISIS, without actually asking about the political motivations of these women, you know, which would probably challenge the status quo. It has been also thematized in the media, and I will elaborate on that later on, though. So this is an example of a women's cooperative that was created, I think, in the Cizre canton. This is another one. So what is very essential, what I also want you really to get from this, is that in spite of the attacks by both the regime and by a disgusting mentality named Islamic State, which has gained international reputation for beheading, crucifying, and killing people who don't believe in the same thing as you do or who oppose you for whatever reason, which has explicitly announced a war on women. In spite of these attacks, the people in Rojava and also in spite of political and economic marginalization worldwide, they're also trying to establish a system that is worth fighting for. That is why the people there, parallel to this existential fight, this existential war that they lead against the Islamic State, they also want to create a new vision of freedom, a new understanding of justice, of liberation. And well, women's liberation is the core principle of that, and one element of that is women's integration into the economy in order for them to be financially, economically independent. So let us come to the representation of Kurdish women fighters. So first of all, Kurdish women have been fighting against very different kinds of regimes. So even though you only hear about it now, maybe some of you haven't, but some of you might have only heard about the resistance of Kurdish women in the recent times because of the intense media coverage. This is nothing new at all. When I was born, I knew that Kurdish women were fighting. So this is actually something very, very normal for Kurdish people, that women are taking up arms. But for both Western Orientalism and also in order to legitimize the fight against Islamic State, people now in many problematic ways co-opt the resistance of Kurdish women for their own purposes. But the truth is, these women not only fight physically against the Islamic State, which sells women as sex slaves, they also fight an ideological battle against the Islamic State. Because the Islamic State in many ways is the complete opposite of the Kurdish women's liberation movement. Because it, with its principles based on domination, on humiliation, on destruction, it kills everything that the women's movement tries to stand for, which is equality, democracy, and so on. So it is very important to know the motives of these women. So these are women from the YPG, which is the Women's Defense Forces in Rojava. As soon as the revolution was announced, the People's Defense Forces, the YPG, YPG were announced, but shortly after that the women decided to form their autonomous defense structures. So the YPG is of course linked to the YPG, but they are also autonomously organized. They conduct their own operations and so on. They organize themselves autonomously. There are several hundred battalions across Rojava, and women have been very active in the resistance against the Islamic State. And you also hear this sentence all over again in every single article: Islamic State is scared of these women because if they get killed by a woman, they will not go to heaven. So maybe, yes, but this is very, very simplistic. You know, this is very, very easy. This really simplifies a very, very complicated issue. First of all, women taking up arms in such a patriarchal society is, first of all, a revolution in itself. But secondly, that women take up arms against a mentality like the Islamic State, which has really explicitly announced a war on women with its feminicidal politics, with its actions and I mean, I don't have to tell you about the atrocities of the Islamic State. This is in many ways very, very revolutionary, and people need to acknowledge that beyond these sensationalist claims like, oh, these women are fighting Islamic State. Yes, but then ask yourself, why, and what is the movement behind this? What do these women want? What are their politics? What are their aims? If you really appreciate the braveness, the courage of these women, then acknowledge the Rojava administration. Why don't you do that? Because this is what these women are fighting for. But the Rojava cantons have been internationally marginalized. I also want you to just see a few pictures of what this revolution looks like. For example, this man and this girl, this is her father. They're both fighting against the Islamic State. This is a woman saying goodbye to her daughter. This was a picture from Kobane, but not now, but I think in July, in July or August, because this is actually the third major onslaught of the Islamic State on Kobane this year. This is a Kurdish man who is fighting, as you notice, under the banner of the YPG, which is the Women's Defense Forces. And this is because his daughter She was fighting in the Women's Defense Forces, but then she was injured. And then he, in spite of his age, he took up arms also to fight against Islamic State in Kobane for his daughter. As we speak, the entire city of Kobane is armed because, you know, until a few days ago, there was absolutely no support from the outside. And people have been saying Kobane will fall any minute, but it didn't happen. And also, this is not because they are militarily superior. This is not because, I mean, obviously the Islamic State has exploited very sophisticated weaponry from Mosul, from the Iraqi army, US weapons. They have very heavy artillery, whereas the people in Kobane were often just defending themselves with Kalashnikovs. But it is this resistance will, this knowledge that they are protecting something that is worth fighting for, that they're protecting a brighter future, that is why Kobane did not fall. Not because the people were necessarily militarily better equipped, they weren't.
Pilar, you have 3 more minutes.
Okay. Okay, so this is a all-women's battalion of mothers. They're actually called, they have called themselves Mothers Battalions after also a few months ago. So, since I only have 3 more minutes, I will have to cut it very shortly. I want you to know from this, and we will have 2 other very great speakers after this, the revolution in Rojava is not just a fight against the Islamic State in this physical, existential way. It was about a genocide, it was a life or death situation, but it is also about a bigger thing. It is about a future. It is about a perspective for the peoples in the Middle East. In spite of this war that has just cost so many lives in Syria and in Iraq, the people in Rojava are trying to create a new system. They're trying to work with the different peoples in the region, with the different religious groups in the region. They have established women's councils, academies, a new university in spite of this war. So that is why the resistance of Kobane matters so much. That is why the Rojava project, if you will, is actually a revolution. Because the people in the Middle East have just been taught by all these unjust wars, by these military interventions, by sectarianism, by ethnic tensions, and so on, that they will never be free, that they need to beg for little pieces. But no. The real self-determination of the peoples is actually a big threat to the status quo. That is why people in the Rojava were excluded from the Geneva II conference. That is why there are political and economic embargoes on them. That is why Turkey still can say this is a terrorist enclave, and the people, because Turkey is a NATO member, will listen to it. Well, the Turkish state has actively, this is nothing that the Kurdish people are saying as conspiracy theories, you know, because for 2 years, Kurdish people have been fighting against the Islamic State, but nobody cared. Only a few months ago, people thought, oh, there's an Islamic State. Well, the Kurds have been telling you this for 2 years, but you didn't listen. And Turkey actually supported the jihadists with militarily, financially, logistically, politically. Okay, and yet they were saying we cannot tolerate the terrorists. These people who have been leading a resistance that has inspired the whole world, they are internationally labeled as terrorists because of a system like Turkey, which has appeased, which has tolerated and actively contributed to the rise of the Islamic State. This is how refugees from Rojava were treated at the Turkish border. People who wanted to join the resistance in Kobane, this is what Turkish soldiers have done to them. People have mobilized at the border. People have torn down borders because they don't believe in these borders, not because they want to create new ones, but because they don't believe in these, because these borders have failed. And that is why this is a very inspiring moment. So I really don't want to take too much of your time. I just want you to say that Rojava is really an alternative to the peoples in the Middle East. It should be a source of inspiration to us. The fact that Kobane did not fall is not because, these are very good fighters. Of course, they are very experienced in the fight against the Islamic State. But it was the anticipation of a brighter future, a future in which women will be free, a future in which different peoples will cooperate with each other. That is why Kobani did not fall. And even though everyone predicted it from the first day, it took more than 30 days and Kobani still stands. And we should really ask ourselves why, and we need to ask ourselves how we can do this. And this is the last picture that I want you to have up. This is the hair of a Kurdish woman fighter wiping out the Islamic State. And so, yes, once again, I would like to just send my salutes, send all my respect to the people who are fighting against the Islamic State. And I really wish that we can all mobilize together to express our solidarity, and not just in words, but also in actions, because this is a historic moment in history, in world history. And we need to be really on the right side. And this is an opportunity that we cannot miss. And we owe this to the brave resistance of the people in Rojava. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dilar. We move on to our second speaker. And those of you who realize that you're in the wrong room and should be going to the land grabbing room, you can take your opportunity now. Anybody confused? No. This is about Rojava, as you could not have not grasped. We move to our second speaker, which is Dilsa Osman. She's a politician and a journalist from Rojava. Since 2005, she has been a coordinating member of the Union of STAR, the umbrella organization of the women's movement in Rojava. Currently, she is the co-president of the Kurdish Democratic Society Congress in Europe. So Dilsa, please take the floor, and she will be joined by her translator, Joan Ali. Dilsa?
دسری ده از دخوازم کمیته کو ارگانیزا کرنا و شوی رابیه از وان سپاس بکم هر وها گلی لورح آمده بونه از گله کی جوان سپاسیا خو دشینم.
First of all, I would like to welcome the organizing party of this event and all attendees in this evening.
ولات سوریا پشتی شر جهان یکمین هات آواکرن اولات بریا شر دست بکه 20 میلیون انسان همان دور داجیان دیکرن بشکی ج مزوبوتامیا ج عرض مزوبوتامیا د ناوا سوریه دا بشکی جوید ناوا سوریه دا دیکه.
Now, as you know, that Syria was established after the World War II. And now 20 million people was living in Syria, and it is an important part of Mesopotamia. There is a piece of Syria getting into Mesopotamia region.
لسر عرض سوریه گلک پک هاتین جدا ده جیان دکرن اولین جدا جیل ورد جیان کرن ج بري وحطانا هذا دروشكي پر آرامدا پر بهفرا يعني وكا قال بهفرا جيان كريا.
And in Syria there is different components and different religions. They were living together peacefully.
اف موزايكا كو بري لبر چاوابو اف تابلويا خوشك انا هاتلو ميزيني او تابلو هات گوهرتن پشتي شري كو بري 3 سالا دست بكريا.
This rich frame which Syria was living in, as you know, all of you, that now it's getting disturbed by the Syrian crisis.
شركو بري 3 سالا دست بكريا ام كارم بيجن براني سوريا تيدا هاتيا هلوشاندن همان ام كارم بيجن 10 مليون انسان دوي شريده هاتن کوچبرکرین هن 5 میلیون دهندر دا 5 میلیون در ودا و همان نزدیکی 10,000 انسان جی دنابرا ونداهی و کشتین یان امکان بیجن شهیدن شورش سوریه بون.
Just to mention that after 3 years of armed revolution in Syria, 5 million people, 10 million people was refugee, 5 of them internally, 5 of them externally, and about 200,000 killed and missed people are in Syria now.
باجارن هری مزن ایکو بناو دنگ بون دوی دمیدا نما کس نازدکه یم بخوا از باجار کی سوریه دیجیم حلب باجار دیامین دوردا دما ام دیمن و دیمینن ام نما نازدکن.
The main cities in Syria, like Aleppo, Dilsha was living in Aleppo, for example, and if you now go and walk down in Aleppo, she will never know that this is the old Aleppo which she knew.
ام تکارم بیجن افشر باندور کی پرمزن له همو گلی لسوریه دیجیان باندور کی پرمزن له هاتا چیکرین له افشر جی چروسکا و یکمین دما دست بکر او چروسک گهاش هرم روجاوای کردستان جی.
When Syrian crisis started, as you know, the spark of this crisis was affected in Rojava region also, from the beginning.
از خوازم روشا کردان د سوریه دا بری شورشه از هنی کی وکم از گله کی دمه نخوازم بگرم جی لی اما گله روجاوا گله کرد لسوریه بری شورشه بدبن د سلاداری سیستم و رژیم باسه دا جیان دکرن.
I want just to brief the Kurd situation in Syria before the revolution also, that the Kurds was also depressed by the Ba'ath regime before the revolution itself also.
Kurd د ناوا سوریه دا به ماف دجیان همان هما 300,000 انسان مافی وان یه جیانه یه خواندنه یه کو تشت بناوی وان هبه مالین وان زاروکین وان نکارین تشتک لسر ناوی خواقیت کربانا جبر کو نوک ولاتین سوریه دهات الناس کرن.
Syrian Kurds were not able to speak their language. There were 200,000 Kurds in Syria without any identity, and they just couldn't recognize themselves as a citizen in Syria. They were kind of second level citizen in Syria.
يعني عم تكانم بيجن جهمو ما في خوايم بنجهين أو محروم بون بس دويامين جي دمان إيكو همالاتي بون أو جي دبن باسقية كي دبن زغتكي كو ما في خوايه چاندي ين سياسي دهمو آليا دا أو ما في وان تنبو.
On other hands, also the political rights of Kurds in Syria was not recognized. It was just refused to work under any political party as a Kurdish party in Syria.
لو ما جي چقاس ام دبيجن كو شورشا روجاواي كردستاني بشورشا پشتي شورشا سوري دست بكريه لي اما دراسيه خدا شورشا روجاواي كردستاني د سالا 2004 دا د 12 آذار دا دوي دمه دا دست بكريه.
Now, actually, we believe that our revolution was started before the Syrian revolution. It was started in 12 March 2004 in Kamishlo city.
وإذا ميدما رجيم إيريشي سرقالي كرد لجزيرة كريه شورش جويدا ميدا دست بكريه لي أما برنج كيفالي ده 2012 ده بشتي باي بهار عربة لسوريا جيدا لورجي لروجافاي كردستان جي شورش دست بكر.
Now, the revolution in Rojava also started in 2011 when the Syrian revolution, or so-called Syrian Arabic Spring, was started.
دنوزده تیرمه ده سال 2012 شورش جباجار کوبانه دست بکر برماهی رژیم باس جباجار کوبانه و پشتیوه باجار عفرینه باجار جزیره جی شورش دور ده دست بکر ددمکی کرده گل ورد کواری رژیم به تمامی درخسته و ریوابریا ورد تخسته دست خواه.
Now, actually, 2012, the 19th July, we could say the revolution in Rojava started in Kobani city and started to spread its liberation from regime forces to Jazire Canton and Afrin Canton as well.
ایریشن داعش لسر کانتونا جزیره دست بکر پشرا علیک عفرین جی دجارا دست بکریه و وگریه کانتونا کوبانه جی و داویه افسالک و پنج مهن ایریش بسر کوبانه دهاتیه.
We want to just point that the attacks of ISIS is not very new on Rojava. It started in Jazire Canton first, and then to Afrin Canton, but now it's heavily on Kobani Canton.
امت کارم بیجن افسالک و پنج مهنه گلی کوبانه به اراده خواه به وینا خواه یا آزاد و به آلیکاریا هزن یکینه پاراستنا گل یپگی و یکینه پاراستنا جنه یپجی برخودانه کی پرمزن و به همپال درخستنه.
Since 1 year and 5 months, Kobani, it was and still under the siege of ISIS, but with the resistance of YPG and YPJ, Women Protection Unit and People Protection Unit, they could survive so far.
اف برخودانا کوبانه راستیا داعش یانجی ایسیس درخست هولی راستیا کو اف هزکی وک داعشه کو گلک باجارن عراقي وك جشنغال بقرة موصل كركوك حتى جيهان هما نزيكي هوليري گلک ولات و باجارن سوریه جی به دست خواهست دمکی پرکرد دست خواهست هزکی به ویرنگی اف 35 روزن له همبر باجار کوبانه نکاری حتی نها تسر کفتن به دست بخسته.
As you know that how quick ISIS could occupy some big city like Mosul in Iraq, like Shingal Mountain also in Iraq, but now since 35 days they are trying heavily to enter Kobani, but they couldn't fall down Kobani so far.
کوبانه وقت زانین باجار کی نپرمزنه باجار کی د عالی خاکنگاری ده باجار کی بچوکه گلیوی و یکینه پاراستنه به چکن نگران هیچ نگران به چکن پر نورمال لهمبر ایریشن هوانه ین چتین داعشه به چکن گران به تف هفکاری دولت در دوره تبي آلیکاریا لوجستیک ایک جوارا دهات لهمبر وانا گشی به نتشتکی برخواد دا جبلی اراده خوا.
Actually, Kobani is not that big city, but and with very light weapons and the beliefs of their people, they could stop ISIS for 35 days so far.
امت کارم بیجن شورشا کوبانه آنها برخودانا کوبانه برخودانا روجاوا بگیشتی حتی نها تمثیل کریه و درخستیه برچاوا.
The struggle of Kobani and resistance of Kobani could highlight the revolution in Rojava so far.
راستیا شورشا روجاوا یک سر سه بینگها هاتیا آواکرن او درخستیه برچاوا بینگها ما یکمین کو راست عدالت وکهوی دموکراسی نتن دریا کو ام رژیم راکن اف پیکنای.
The revolution in Rojava actually built up on 3 bases. The first one that we believe that the fall down of dictatorial regime, we need to change. We need to change them and also create the alternative for this regime, not only to fall it down.
شورشن كو لباجار عربا مينا تونس ليبيا مصر بيك هاتنا انجام وان شورشان لبرشافن ديكتاتوريين رابو اما لجبديلا وان الترناتيفا وان ديكتاتوريين نو هاتن شونا وان وحتى نها شورش جرك بيجي يشتا انجام ويلي ام دبينن شورشكي دجبر دركت هولي.
As we say, the human rights, democracy, justice couldn't take place by displacing regime or persons. And the revolution in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia is a good proof or example for that. They could displace the regime, but the democracy is not took place yet.
هلبت بداوي كرنا رژیم دیکتاتور لآلیکی لأما آنین دنا پروژه‌ای که آلترناتیو یانجی سیستمی که آلترناتیو بخوا او گوهرتنه کو گرک وره چیکرن جبر کو شخص تنه نبخوا دیکتاتوری بخارتینه لأما ذهنیتا دولتی او دیکتاتوریا رژیم او دستلات داره یعنی نه اساس نت شخصه ل رژیمن.
We believe that the regime, we need to displace the regime itself, not only the person, because the revolution is to displace the whole regime itself, not only the persons themselves.
ما باور دكر وقت أفجار كرد لسوريا كو رژیمکی وقت رژیم سوری رژیمکی دیکتاتور وقت 40 سال سر دستلاداری سوریه مایه او رژیم تجاری نکاره بخوره دموکراسی بینه.
We believe that such kind of regime, even if you displaced it, couldn't bring any democracy to as alternative. We have to create this democracy along with the revolution itself.
هر وها مدزانی کو شورش سوری ج خطا شورش خوا درکتیه او وگوهریه شرکی دنابرا شرکی طائفی شرکی اتنی.
We believed that the Syrian revolution was shifted from its natural or normal route. They shifted it to armed revolution, and that's not what the Syrian wants actually.
ام باور دکن جی درکتنا به شورشه ج خطا شورشه باندوری کی دولتن در دور سوریه و به سری داجی دولت ترک دویدا باندوری کی پرمازن لسر وکر.
We believe that the neighborhoods, countries, especially Turkey, played a very important role to convert the Syrian revolution into armed revolution.
يعني مجلسان اجتماعية سورية كو دنافا تركيا داجبيني خواچه دكر پشگیریا تركيا جيرا گلك هبو اف انجمان دسريدا ما في كيمنتوين لسوريا ناس ندكر و هر وها ما في كرداجي دناف دا ناس ندكر.
The national Syrian Council, which was supported by Turkey actually, we realized that they shifted the Syrian revolution, and by the support of Turkey, they also, after a few meetings with them, we realized that they don't want to recognize the minorities in Syria.
تشتي دهات قوتن جالية واندا دس بيك بلا ام رژیم بخینن پشتی و ام مافا نقاش بکن يعني افتي معناها كو ام شورشي الباش خينن حتى كو ام رژیم بخینن.
They were telling us, the National Syrian Council, that let us fall down the regime first, then we will talk about the rights and democracy and blah, blah, blah. But we believe that the revolution should be along with falling the regime down.
اف منطقه كيكو تشوت بوجبوما جبركو بخد زاني كو ماف ديمقراطي وكهفي دجواكي دا وددما شورش دا ددما كو شورش لدارة تيمبي كانين نبشتي شورشا.
This didn't make a sense for us. We refused that we will look to the right, to the democracy, to the pluralism, actually, after we fall the regime down. And we started to create alternative along with the revolution itself.
So you have 3 more minutes.
جبروي جبركو ما باش اناليزا كريه كو رژیم جه عالی کی دا تو برجواندی کردا ناین برچاوا عالی کی دیتر جی اپوزیسیونا کو جدر و ده دستکرن او جی دا اجنده وان دا تشتکی دموکراسی جبو نه کرد و نه سوریه نبو.
Because we believe that even the regime or the opposition, Syrian opposition also, that they are not looking at our rights and the minorities.
جبرويجي ما زانيكو تاني دا انجيندا اوبوزيسيون دا خستنا رژیم هي تشتكي جبلوينينا لو ما جي دست بآواكرنا سيستما خسارية ديمقراطيك ل هرم روجاوای كردستان دست بكردور دا.
And that's why we started building our self-rule democratic administration in the 3 cantons in Rojava.
او سيستم خسارية ديمقراطيك للسيرفي بنجهيجي 3 كانتون هاتن آواكرن عفرين كوباني وجزيرة او هر 3 كانتونا وسيستم خسارية ديمقراطيك همو بيكاتا همو اول همو نتو تكارين جي خوا تيدا بگرتانا وتمثيليا خوا دور دا بديتانا.
The self-rule administration in Rojava, in 3 cantons, it could share or all components of the Rojava and religions of Rojava, they could participate in this self-rule administration.
ازمونا ما تجربة ما در روجاوای کردستان اجبو 3 سالا تشتن گرینگ آنی برچاوا او تشجی کو ام نکارن به دیکتاتوری خلاص من به بيكو ام سيستمكي ديمقراط وكا الترناتيف بي آواكرن اف سيستما الترناتيف در روجاوای كردستان دا برنگي خسارية ديمقراطيك دركت هولي وكا سيستمكي كو نتنج روجاوای كردستان را دكاري ببا سيستمكي ج سوريا جشيرا.
We believe that with such self-rule administration system, we could also fall down the regime with such kind of systems, and we could distribute it or for all Syria, not only in Rojava. It could be a good model for the future of Syria, actually.
ام تقارن بيجن وبكارجي ببه موديل كي جبو رجلاتا نافين بيجشتي نتني او جبركو انجام شورشين ولاتن عربا همول برچاون كو نكارين بر بالديمقراطيه و بيكو سيستمكي وصا بيلدار خستن.
We believe also that it is a good model for the whole Middle East also, not only for Syria. And it could and the revolution or the Arabic Spring, it's good, the Arabic Spring results, it's a good example that such kind of system will be a good alternative.
دماما پرتنگه لأسخازم بيجم آنها كوباني هركس بزانه بي كوباني دخطا يكمين يا باراستنا نتني كوباني نتني سوريا ونتني رجلاتا نافين أو دخطا يكمين يا باراستنا دنياي جي تروريا داعشي.
We don't have enough time actually, but we want just to pass you a message that Kobani is the first line of defense, not only for Kobani itself. We believe that Kobani is defending against terror, the international terror also.
جبروي ام بانغ اخوا جهمو جهان رادكن جهمو سازي ناف نتويرا دكن كو بشجريا خطا برخدانا كوباني بكن ولدجي تيروري خبات اخوا تيكوشين اخوا هرتم بهم با دوام بكن.
We call for all international communities and organizations to support Kobane because Kobane is defending all against the international terror.
جاركدن از هاتناوا و قهدار كرناوا از جاركدن سباستكم.
Again, I am thanking everybody and all attendees and organizing party. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dilsa. Thank you for this very enlightening speech. And I'm sure in the public there's many questions, particularly on the comparison with the Rojava case and the other Arabic Spring revolutions. But before we go into a break and before we go into questions, I have our third speaker of tonight, which is Joost Jongerden. He's an assistant professor at the Sociology and Anthropology Department at Wageningen University. He specialized in social spatial and social political analysis of development and conflict. His focus areas have been Turkey, Kurdistan, and he did himself pursue fieldwork in the Rojava region. So Joost, the floor is yours for 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I would like to start with an article written about 2 weeks ago by David Graeber, already a name mentioned already before by Jonas Staal in his introduction. But I think, although the article is 2 weeks old, I think the article can be used to analyze the nature of the revolution in Rojava, but also the attitude of the international community. The article was written in The Guardian on October 8, and the title of Graeber, his article was Why is the World Ignoring the Revolutionary Kurds in Syria? Graeber, I don't know if you know him, he is a political activist but also a professor of anthropology at the London School of Economics. And quite a recent publication of him is The Democracy Project, A History, a Crisis, a Movement. And the book is referred to as the story of the resilience of the democratic spirit. And David Graeber, he sees that spirit of democracy, the spirit of resilience, a spirit of a secular democracy in Rojava. It's a democracy which allows or even makes it possible for different communities to practice their beliefs, whether they are Muslim, Shia or Sunni, whether they are Christian or Yazidi. It's also a democracy which allows people to speak and teach their own language. And this is something which is not very self-evident, or which is not self-evident in the region, not in Syria, not in Turkey, where it's still forbidden to teach the language in Kurdish, for example. It's also a democracy, and it has already been said before by the other speakers, which allows people to take responsibility over their communities, over their lives. And it's a democracy which is besieged. It's besieged by the Islamic State. It's already mentioned several times. It's squeezed by Turkey, which not only tries to isolate Rojava, it practices already for more than 2 years an embargo against the free cantons, against Rojava, but it also gave or gives logistic support to the Islamic State and, according to several sources, also intelligence and weapons support. The world, most of the world, has been watching, at least for a long time. I think that the public exposure of US non-intervention in Kobani more or less forced the US government to act. And this is an accomplishment, of course, in first instance, of those people in Kobani who showed a strong and fierce resistance against the assault by Islamic State. In the Netherlands, I think, the attitude of non-intervention is still prevailing. And Graeber, he compares, also mentioned before by Jonas Staal, he compares that attitude to the one exhibited at the time of the Spanish Revolution in 1936. An attitude of non-intervention which resulted in the suppression of the revolution and a massacring of its supporters. Comparisons always fall short. And I think that this comparison, the comparison of the revolution in Rojava with the Spanish Revolution, should fall short. This revolution should not end in the suppression of the democratic revolution and the massacring of its supporters. And I will try to explain in the remainder of my talk why I think that the defense of Kobani or a defense of Rojava is important. It's not only about a city and a people under attack by Islamic State, which is of course terrible in itself, but it's also about the democratic movement which is under threat, a movement which stands for pluriform and secular democracy, one which is counterposed to the cleansing by ethnic and Islamic State nationalism, which we have seen not only since the last few months, not only since the last few years, but I think since the last few decades in the Middle East. There was not an Islamic State, but there were nationalist governments which also did a very severe cleansing policy in the region. But let us look at the model which we have been talking about, or which I have been talking about before, but which also has been talked about by the previous speakers. Inspired by Abdullah Öcalan, parties like the Kurdistan Workers' Party and the Unity Party developed in the 2000s an ideological and political outlook based on the idea of what they call radical democracy. And this idea of radical democracy has been developed in 3 interlinked projects. The project of a democratic republic, the project of democratic autonomy, and a project which is called Democratic Confederalism. And I think these 3 projects, they function as a reorientation. They redefine, reorganize the political demands of the people in the region from a state-oriented project into a people-oriented and emancipatory politics of connectivity. And it sounds abstract. We'll try to make it more concrete. The project of a democratic republic aims explicitly at the disassociation of democracy and nationalism, of demos from ethnos. And concretely, this resulted in the proposal for a new constitution in which citizenship is not defined in ethnic terms, in Turkey in terms of Turks, or in Syria in terms of Arabs, but in terms of civil rights, in terms of citizenship. Democratic autonomy does not refer to some kind of sub-sovereignty granted to lower institutions within and by a sovereign state. It refers to practices in which people produce and reproduce the necessary and desired conditions for a life in dignity. And they do that through a direct engagement and collaboration with one another. Simply said, people as active citizens having the right, maybe also the responsibility, to create their own alternatives, to create their own schools, organize the economy, or the places where they want to express their beliefs, doing it by themselves, not through demands channeled to a political party, but organizing it yourself. Democratic confederalism can be characterized as a bottom-up system for self-administration. It's organized at the level of villages, it's organized at the level of neighborhoods, of cities, of regions. And still, this may sound abstract, but it's not. It's grounded in people's practices. It's practiced in Rojava, but it's also practiced in many cities and villages in what is called northern Kurdistan or southeast Turkey. Democratic autonomy and democratic confederalism stand in a rich tradition of thinking and doing politics, although the concepts may sound a bit unfamiliar for us. Murray Bookchin, also a name which has been mentioned before today, a libertarian thinker and radical ecologist, very much inspired the Kurdish movement with these concepts, these ideas about democratic autonomy and democratic confederalism. And according to Bookchin, this democratic autonomy and confederalism belongs to an undercurrent in politics. Bookchin distinguishes between two ideas of politics, and he mentions them the Hellenic model and the Roman model, which according to him gave rise to two different imaginaries of politics and understandings of government. The first, the Hellenic model, stands for a participatory, democratic form of politics to which Bookchin himself finds himself close. And the second, the Roman model, stands for a centralist and statist form, which he rejects. And the Roman model, the argument goes, has become the dominant form in modern society, informing the American and French constitutionalists in the 18th century, while the Athens model exists as a counter and underground current, finding expression in the Paris Commune of 1871, the Spanish Revolution of 1936, the Russian Revolution, the springtime of the Russian Revolution in 1917, and the Spanish Revolution of 1936. The centralized model has a herd of subjects, but the Hellenic model, an active citizenship. And this is the model which is also practiced in Rojava. But it's not only Bookchin who wrote about this undercurrent in politics. Also, Hannah Arendt, she relates this council movement, which we see today practiced in Rojava, to currents in the American Revolution, and especially to the ideas of Thomas Jefferson. So previously established in revolutions in America, in France, in Spain and Russia, today these are practiced in the Kurdistan region in Turkey, but also in Rojava, or mainly on the first place in Rojava. We can put this model of democratic autonomy, democratic confederalism in a historical perspective, but I think we can also compare them with contemporary projects elsewhere. And this is maybe not a place to go into an extensive comparison, but maybe one or two examples could be mentioned. And probably the most obvious comparison is the one with the comparison with the project of the Zapatista. And there's a clear resemblance between the project of democratic autonomy and democratic confederalism of the movement, the Kurdish movement in Kurdistan, with the project of autonomous municipalities of the Zapatista movement. They also use a similar type of language. They refer to similar type of practices in which the self-governing and the self-ruling capacities of people are put central. But I think that the movement today in Kurdistan can also be compared, for example, with the movement of landless rural workers, MST, in Brazil. A movement which is built on the same kind of ideas as being practiced today in Rojava. Let me say a few words more on the content of the approach, so the possible issues the approach, the model in Rojava tries to address. And one of the issues they try to address, I think, is the separation of sovereign power from people. And this is an issue which is also raised by people like Antonio Negri and Michael Hart, but also by Hannah Arendt. What they say is that early conceptions of democracy was about the rule of everyone by everyone, the rule of everyone by everyone. Today, and there was the conception of the 18th century, the idea of democracy in the 18th century. And today, we have a representative democracy. And the issue in a representative democracy is that it at the same time connects people to power through the representatives, but it also disconnects people from power. Representation does not only imply a connection between the represented and the representative, but also disconnects the rulers from the ruled. And in the council approach in Rojava, people try to make steps to narrow that separation between representatives and represented. And the co-chair of the PYD, Salih Muslim, argues that the relation between state and people over the past decades in the Middle East, but I think not only in the Middle East, have been conceptualized in terms of an active state and the people as its objects, not as subjects in the capacity to decide and act themselves. While the new model of democratic autonomy, Muslim argues, is based on active citizenships, debating problems and enacting solutions by the people and for the people. The second issue, I think, is that the concept of democratic autonomy and confederalism, that model in Rojava, addresses the importance of politics as a public affair. For someone as Hannah Arendt, freedom is the freedom to act as a citizen, and that's to participate, to be heard, to debate, to exchange views, and to make decisions together. And that's also why Arendt refers to the council democracy as the lost treasure of democratic revolutions, since these councils provide the space for meeting of people to meet each other, to relate to each other, and to establish a form of self-government and self-rule. Council democracy is also about learning the skills of being a citizen and not a mere consumer. And I want to give you a citation from already 2 years ago from people I talked to in this council movement in Diyarbakir, a city in North Kurdistan or the southeast of Turkey. And our aim, explained the chair, the co-chair of a council in a poor neighborhood in the city, is to face the problems in our lives, in our neighborhoods, and to solve them by ourselves without being dependent or in need of the state. Another member of the council added, "We try to live without the state. However retempered, the idea of the state is nestled in the minds of people, and it's difficult to make people think about politics without making reference to the state. So we are both practicing self-organization as well as learning to understand what it is by doing it. This is learning the art of citizenship."
3 more minutes.
So the confrontation between Islamic State and Rojava is a confrontation between two models. In Rojava, they try to build a new society on the basis of a democratic spirit. The Islamic State is doing a Sunni Muslim oriented refashioning of the old nationalist model of one state and one people, expelling everyone who does not fit in. And more than the old caliphate, to which it refers, I think it resembles, Islamic State resembles 20th century nationalism. Islamic State is living without the other, literally, by killing and expelling them. PYD, or Rojava, is about living with one another. And those who attack Rojava, they do not like the model. Islamic State is very explicit about that. Also in the English language journal they publish. They know very well why they attack Rojava, because they don't like the model, the idea it represents. And I think the same is true for Turkey. So what about to return to the international community, or maybe to what we may call the progressive forces? What about them? I think, first of all, many do not recognize the model, the struggle. As state-oriented, state-centered parties, they have difficulty to understand and to relate to a non-statist council democracy type of movement. The traditional left thinks in terms of states and state-oriented practices, and may not be able or is not able to relate itself to a movement for which the state is not the main point of reference. The radical left, they have difficulties related to the movement, because it's not pure enough. These are the orthodox. They walk behind the banner of anti-imperialism, and for them the events in Rojava are not important in themselves, but another occasion to show that US and EU policies and politics in the Middle East are bad. And these orthodox, they blame the YPG, the YPG, for asking the US for air support. And on Twitter, I read a very nice response of a YPG fighter. And he said, well, if the international left had an air force, we first would have asked them. But obviously they do not have. The struggle in Kobani is one of life and death. Not only of the people who are surrounded, but also of a model of a secular radical democracy. And not supporting the struggle may contribute to one's orthodox purity, but also to the slaughtering of those who try to deepen democracy, a people-oriented democracy in the real world. So what to do? And maybe 3 issues we can or cannot take to the session after this series of talks. And there are 3 things I would like to suggest. First of all, recognition of the PYD as an actor. When I read the debates about the Syria crisis one week ago, I have the impression that the people in Kobani and Rojava, but in Kobani in particular, are acted upon or looked upon as prospective refugees. And I think this is capitulation, making a policy on the premises that Kobani will fall. But they do not have to be prospective refugees, the people in Kobani. If they are supported, they can, and maybe they already are, the icons of a democratic struggle. And I think, secondly, that the PYD should be invited on a party level, in parliament, by political parties, at the ministries. I think exactly 1 year ago, I was invited at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to talk about the situation in Rojava. And I also suggested them to invite directly someone from the Kurdish National Congress or to invite one of the co-chairs from the PYD for discussion on the ministry about the situation in Rojava. But they turned that down with the remark that, well, they are associated to a terrorist organization or on a terror list. I think we have to jump over our own shadow and get rid of this 9/11 security-oriented discourse of terrorism. So they should be invited. And maybe a third thing, which we already seen in other countries, in Germany, in the UK, but not yet in the Netherlands, is that we could have a delegation of people, of members of parliaments, to people who are active in healthcare or in education, academics, who go to Rojava and to look at the model, to visit people who are active there and see how we, in the Netherlands, also can relate to them. And this is where I want to end with. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joost, for a masterful analysis of this revolutionary model. Very enlightening. We're going into a break, 15-minute break, so everybody please be back at 21:25 latest to continue our dialogue now in a more interactive way by having two respondents and your question and remarks. So 50 minutes.
yere rakin rakin serleşkere merakin yere rakin 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 agite merakin بالبلو شالي راد ريزن راد لولو عقيتون لولو شكرين هيلين يا راكين 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 قرماني مروكين راكن 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 عقيتي مرة